Outman. And Senator Tice. Madam Chair, you have 19 yeas and 0 nays. The legislative transfer request is adopted.
Thank you. All right, we'll now transition to our final agenda item, which is Senate Bill 350, which is a Senator Bayer bill. And I believe she'll be speaking not only to 350, but also 555, which is a bill sponsored by myself related to promise zones. So, Senator Bayer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about the 2 promise zone bills today Senator Anthony and I have put together. Senate Bill 350 came out of work that we did last term with Pontiac Promise Zone, and we did actually successfully vote that out of the Senate last year. We didn't manage to get a hearing in the House, but things look promising for this year. The Promise Zone programs, if you're not familiar, come out of the Kalamazoo Promise and have given across the state in Promise Zone communities hundreds of kids an opportunity to get advanced education, post-secondary education with help from their communities. So giving the opportunity for communities like Pontiac to offer that promise of ongoing education, higher education to the students in that community. And I will say that in the communities where they have promise zones, what I learned when I worked with Pontiac, often they are living in family circumstances where it's very difficult for them to be successful in their post-secondary pursuits. So they'll be good kids, get good grades, get an opportunity for this great scholarship, but then they get there and it turns out they live in a household that maybe has 10 people living in it, and it's really tough to do your work, really hard to get homework done, hard to focus. Or maybe they're responsible for babysitting a bunch of younger kids at the same time and doing their part-time jobs as well. So what we wrote this Bill 350 for was the idea that students should have the opportunity, and the boards, the Promise Zone boards, should have the opportunity to use some of that money to help pay for on-campus housing so that the students will have the opportunity to get the work done and be successful. And we did know, and we did hear stories and meet people who clearly were advantaged when they had a chance to have a housing on campus. So with that, we found some further research that supports that, and it became clear that this was something that we should allow the boards to do. It doesn't impact the state funding at all. This is promise money coming from within the community, and it gives the local community board the decision to include that as an allowable expense. One of the things we learned as we were going through this and working with the Promise Zone Authority and working with other organizations is there's more things than just housing. So as we did this in the last term, we uncovered this key problem. Well, once you start getting involved, you realize that there's another one, and then there's another one. There's a few things that are really critically needed for all students going into any kind of higher education. And the federal government has identified a program, a definition of what's required, and they call it cost of attendance. So cost of attendance in college, community college, university, includes things like housing and transportation and childcare and a few other things that are critical for anyone to succeed in this environment. And so we're going to offer an amendment to this shortly that allows us to use that definition that is adopted across the country, including in our state, of the cost of attendance, as opposed to having to come back and add things one at a time. This way we'll focus on all the things to make all of our students successful when we get them opportunities to go, get them the opportunity to succeed, go through the program, graduate, and get a good job. So we're excitedly looking forward to that. The second bill in the package, Senator Anthony's Bill 555, makes a few smaller administrative changes, also requested by the Promise Zone authorities. One is that right now the House and Senate have the opportunity to appoint members of these boards. So the request is that those members be part of the community that they're going to be serving on the board. So either live in or nearby to the community. It also says that promise zones can allow funds to increase readiness to go into a post-secondary program. This would also allow them to use funds to increase success factor readiness programs, so to actually help them graduate. So we want to help them get into the program. We also want to help them get all the way through successfully. And then thirdly, it's an administrative cost definition to make sure that when we talk about administrative costs, that does not include things that actually are educational programs or readiness programs specifically. Keep those administrative costs administrative. And again, neither one of these bills will have any kind of financial impact on the state. Do you have any questions?
We do. Senator Kleinfeld.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know a lot about this, but I was kind of excited when I saw it. And this says that beginning October 16th, 2023, the Michigan Department of Treasury will begin accepting applications for up to 2 Promise Zone designations. Why the limitation of 2, do you know?
We originally started with 10. We had decided early before we came here, you and I, that there would be 10 Promise Zones around the state. Later, it was raised to 15. So there's 2 openings right now to make us 15. That means we have 13 today. So if your community qualified, you could create a new Promise Zone in your community. Apply for that now. Yeah.
We could apply, but I'm assuming that would be quite competitive, given that there's only 15.
I don't know that we've ever gotten to 15. Does anybody?
Oh, okay.
And we do have someone who will speak in a few moments that can speak
All right,
directly
thank
to
you.
that. Yeah,
Good.
of
Thank
course.
you.
Any other questions before we transition to some additional voices? Okay.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to bring up Jamie Jacobs, who's the Deputy Director at the Michigan College Access Network.
Here's the reality. Oh, thank you. Helps when it's on. I've had the privilege of running the Lansing Promise for the last 8 years. We've seen 2,000 Lansing students set foot on a college campus since that time. We're seeing record retention rates and record scholarship utilization, 700% higher than in 2012. We're getting 70% of the graduating class of a Title I school with 91% at risk and 81% free and reduced lunch. Why do I share those numbers? This ain't about charity. This is about investment. The reality is we've only invested about $5.7 million, leveraging probably about $30 million more in state and federal aid. But the return effect of $1 million per student for post-secondary education, we believe that's going to help. The good news within this is because of the retention rates we've seen and the persistence rates we've seen, MSU has actually taken note. The majority of our students, actually 99% of our students, are fully retaining every year, though they are majority Pell eligible. They are majority first gen, and we have to ask why. And I think what we're learning is this: when students are ready and are supported by a community that cares for them, and it's demonstrated consistently over and over again through the schools, through the communities, through their local elected officials, kids do better. They internalize the support, and they're really able to demonstrate significant increase and growth in post-secondary attainment. So the quick and dirty is this: the Lansing Promise and the Promise programs generally are about success after high school, period. We know that the talent gap is real and that talent pipeline is necessary. We simply want to close those gaps with real opportunities, including CTE, so shout out to it, including entrepreneurship, including employment, and including apprenticeship work, along with these post-secondary activities. 350 and 555 allow us simply more flexibility and opportunity to use our money effectively, judiciously, for a greater return on our scholarship investments, so that we're not simply throwing money at kids and saying good luck. We're able to see them through and back home.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kano Phillips. I serve as the Vice Chair of the Pontiac Promise Zone Authority Board. And I appreciate how you teed this up, Senator Baird, and I appreciate how you came and brought in the rear side to this. The reality is we are in dire need of a seismic change that's taking place within the neighborhood dynamics that we have in these communities. Ultimately, certain communities are just more, it's more resources, more financial backing to go ahead and get behind children. But when we look at communities like a Pontiac, a Detroit, Flint, Saginaw, these are just communities that just this cycle just does not exist. And it doesn't because of the fact that Education is supposed to be a priority in everyone's household, but there's a lot of other dynamics that's happening inside these households that I think that we're just overlooking. You got things that are happening inside of some of the doors, inside of some of the walls of some of these homes that'll make your soul cringe, that some of these kids are dealing with. It makes it virtually impossible for them to focus on the educational dynamics that they need to go ahead and focus on to become successful in this particular world. That's why this conversation we have in here and this bill, why it is so important. As the state of Michigan, I appreciate to no end when the Promise Zone came into existence a multitude of years ago. It was something that was drastically and desperately needed to be able to go ahead and help children come to go ahead and kind of level out the playing field, to take some of these obstacles off the table and why kids cannot go on to be successful, especially financial barriers. But however, what's taken place since then has been a change in the climate, where you got these kids now that are growing up in households where they're forced to go ahead and take care of their 4 and 5 and 8-year-old little brothers and sisters. They got to get out of those households. The only way they're going to potentially have the opportunity to be successful. They can't stay into those home dynamics. But when we start talking about retention, what's taking place now is you have these kids that are trying to get away. And I mean away is not going to a college right next door, not going to the other side of the state. So if I'm in Pontiac, I want to go ahead and I do everything I need to do academically in the classroom to put myself in a position to go to a University of Michigan, a Western, a Grand Valley. But the reality is, with the Promise Zone as presently constructed, what takes place is if you have a kid who did everything they need to go ahead and do inside the classroom to go ahead and land a scholarship that will take care of the academic load, what happens is there's a housing component that's there and the room and board component. So now this kid, what's going to take place is the kid, and a lot of times we get really fooled too. A lot of times kids are applying for scholarships for that first year when they're coming out of high school as a senior. And so they might end up landing some other additional scholarships. That's going to wear out after the first semester. And then what happens when the second semester takes place? So if they go to Western, they go there and they try to say, well, I really need to get away. I appreciate this scholarship opportunity. I go there, but all of a sudden, that bill comes for the second semester. Now they just can't stay. And the thing about that we got to go ahead and get away from is we can't be happy with saying we got kids to college. We got to be happy with saying we got kids to college, we got them through college, and they went on to become productive, successful aspects of their communities. And so this is what this bill can potentially do. And that's why I thank every last one of you for even the consideration of understanding what kind of power you wield with us being able to have the potential to change this dynamic around. I am tired of going, I also am the president of a foundation. I'm inside of households on a regular basis, and I'm tired of going into court systems on a regular basis. I want us to be more proactive as opposed to reactive. Reactive is after the kid then found themselves in a situation where they feel like hope has been stripped from them. And this is what happens when you go to school. You think you're good for a year, and next thing you know, the carpet gets yanked off from underneath you, and now all of a sudden now, you're out here going back to what's familiar. It's what you see in these neighborhoods. We got to go ahead and provide another degree or another vantage point for these kids to be able to find their greatness. Don't take hope from a kid. Remember, we were all kids at one point in time, too. And I'm very sure some rode great for you because all of you are sitting in these senatorial seats. And that's what we want to go ahead and be able to do is prepare the next group of kids that's going to eventually replace you and us.
And the church said amen. Thank you. Thank you. Members, any questions? Senator McMorrow.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both so much for being here. A question about, I see that the legislation allows for this funding to be used for on-campus housing. Are there any concerns from what you've seen that might be limiting in some way if certain colleges or universities may not have on-campus housing available, or if that on-campus housing is maybe too expensive compared to an apartment in town? And have been any conversations about utilizing funds for those reasons?
Well, I'm glad you said that because what's taking place is sometimes on some certain campus dynamics, some campuses are starting to pick back up traffic again since COVID. And so there might not be as much free or on campus housing available. So if there is some type of leeway in this bill to be able to go ahead and give someone the opportunity to be able to go ahead and find housing that might be off campus where we can go and take that funding to go and help them with their living arrangements. Absolutely. Because what's taking place, and just use this from an Oakland University standpoint, Oakland University has this whole thing that's in place. Wade McCree is a scholarship that gives kids the opportunity. I'm going to let you to get a full understanding of the challenge that we're facing.
And before you keep going, I'm going to welcome up Chuck Wilbur
Okay.
to join you all, because in the interest of time, we have probably about 6 or 7 minutes. So I'm going to have him introduce himself. He, in some ways, is the godfather of many of these Promise programs. And so as a technician, he can also chime in briefly on some of these components. So, but again, we have about 5 to 7 minutes
Okay.
total. So thank you.
Do I? Okay, yeah, I'll finish it. I'll make it real quick. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Basically, in short, you had a kid that takes advantage, ends up doing what they need to do in the classroom. They end up getting something called a Wade McCree scholarship. Wade McCree pays for everything when it comes to the academic side. But what happens is they get up on campus, and all the money that we have in the world to go ahead and be able to support that kid, we can't do it, because the laws state that the only thing we can go ahead and do is just focus it specifically on the academic load. That's why this conversation and this bill is absolutely crucial. And I'm very sure you can echo that sentiment, can't you, Chuck?
Amen.
Yes.
Okay. Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. And I'm going to try to answer a couple of the questions that came up already. But before I backtrack into that, if I can just go back to the point Senator Baer raised, the beginning of this whole phenomena, this whole movement that we feel part of, kind of really did begin with the Kalamazoo Promise, which put not only that community on the map as a leader in higher education access and equity, but put our state kind of in focus as a leader in that field as well. The Promise Zone legislation that passed in 2008 was the state's follow-up to the Kalamazoo Promise, and we've seen it evolve and grow over these number of years. In that span of time, the movement that we feel a part of, the college access movement, took a goal of getting students to college and really redefined that goal as getting students to and through college. And that latter addition is absolutely critical. And it's particularly important to our students who are attending community colleges, where we have too many students who begin but don't finish and don't come out with a degree or credential of value. So the legislation that Senator Baer has been working on addresses that issue, and the amendment, Senator, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know the amendment that you alluded to that you're going to offer will have a broader definition than that on-campus housing. It would include other housing situations. And with that cost of attendance definition, it kind of gives a larger umbrella to cover a variety of Promise Zone expenditures. Now, I wish I could tell you that every Promise Zone is going to be able to make those expenditures immediately, because our students need them now. Unfortunately, there's limited revenues that go into the Promise Zones and limited fundraising that we're able to carry out in these individual communities. But the communities are striving night and day to be able to do more for the students they serve. So if we take that constraint off that limits us to tuition, mandatory fees, and books, if we take that constraint off, we will raise more money for that purpose, and we will do more for our students. The other question that came up, Senator, you asked the question about the 2 additional zones. The legislation that we passed a number of years ago expanded the number of zones allowable from the original 10 to 15, and 2 of the zones that were on a waiting list had an opportunity over a period of years to actually effectuate their zones. They had the designation, but they had to go ahead and do business as a Promise Zone, start offering scholarships. Unfortunately, those 2 communities chose not to do that. So those 2 slots that were part of the 5 that were added to the Promise Zones in, I believe it was 2017, now are freed up. And the announcement that you picked up on, I think, was just made yesterday or the day before. And indeed, communities will have the opportunity to apply for those 2 designations. But Madam Chair, I wanted to just say one thing, if I could, and then I'd love to take other questions if there are some. One of the great things about this legislation and the zones that have followed is they have always had strong bipartisan support. Senator Baer's done wonderful work for us, but Senator Bumstead was a real hero of ours on a number of issues that grew out of the Baldwin Promise when he was representing that part of the state. So we've always had strong support across party lines, and we think it's one of the reasons the promise zones have been so successful.
Thank you. All right, we did have at least 2 member questions that whoever would like to chime in. I have Senator Santana, followed by Senator McDonald-Rivet.
Thank you for your presentation. I think you both kind of touched on something that, I want to hear more on. You said the Promise Zone program, obviously it helps kids to get to college, but not through. And so I wanted to see if there's any kind of data on how many of the students who we have actually supported through the Promise Zone programs who may have fallen off after that 1 to 2 year time frame, if you have that type of information for us.
That varies a good bit from community to community.
Sure.
My most honest answer to that question is we haven't helped enough be able to reach success. Community college success rates historically and nationally can be relatively low. The measurement usually is done on a 3-year timetable, and we might have the national average, and my colleague Jamie Jacobs probably knows this off the top of her head, but we're far less than 50% of our students being able to achieve a degree in that 3-year time frame. We hope to be able to hit those levels in the Promise Zones. There's a national completion initiative that began in New York City at City University of New York that was later exported to Detroit to create an adjunct to the Detroit Promise called the Detroit Promise Path. And that initiative is still in its early stages, but it is making significant progress in helping more students achieve degrees. And I want to just make this point. When I say degrees, I also mean other certificates of value. We do, through the Promise Zone, support a number of students to achieve apprenticeships, if that's their desire, technical certifications in certain fields, and by broadening that definition of success, we will help get more students to the finish line.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McDonald-Rivet.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I just want to say I understand there's an amendment in the works. Would love to see transportation, particularly to and from a college campus, added to allowable expenses.
Yeah, within that cost of attendance definition that Senator Baer's working on, it will include transportation. And you're absolutely right. For some of our students, it isn't room and board. They're able to live with family housing or local housing, but the community college is 50 miles away. And we need to be concerned about those students.
Thank you. A few cards of support to note regarding this package. Rob Mass from the Michigan Department of Treasury, not wishing to speak but supporting the bill. Again, Jamie Jacobs already spoke in support of the package, as well as Dan Hurley with the Michigan Association of State Universities, not wishing to speak but supporting the bill. And Andy Newman from the Michigan Education Association, not wishing to speak, but supporting this bill. Also earlier, on Senate Bill 23, the MEA by Andy Newman also supporting that bill. We had Cheryl Kennedy from the Michigan Department of Education, not wishing to speak, but supporting the bill. And Ryan Hunt with the Michigan Works Association, not wishing to speak, but also supporting Senate Bill 23. So we, again, we were just doing testimony only today on both of these bills, so please take this opportunity to review the bills before you, ask questions of the bill's sponsors, do research in preparation of a vote soon. But without any further business and no excused members, I need a motion to adjourn. I believe I see Senator Hertel, supported by Senator McCann. Without objection, the Senate Committee on Appropriations stands adjourned.
Turn this off.